I'd been living in the quiet cul-de-sac for about 6 months when I first noticed it. My new place was a small, single-story rental, tucked between a row of identical houses in a sleepy suburban neighborhood. It's the kind of place where people waved politely but kept to themselves. My neighbor to the right, Mr. Hensley, was an older man, maybe in his late 60s, with a face like weathered leather, and eyes that seemed to look through you rather than at you. He was polite enough, nodded when I said hello, made small talk about the weather, but there was something off about him, not in an obvious way, not like he was rude or creepy. It was subtler, like the way he'd pause mid-sentence, staring at nothing, before snapping back with a tight smile. The music started a few weeks after I moved in. It was faint, barely audible through the thin walls, but distinct. Classical, Chopin or Mozart, all soft piano notes and swelling strings. It came from Hensley's house every night, starting around midnight and cutting off abruptly at 3 a.m. I'm a light sleeper, so it bugged me at first, but I figured it was just an old man's routine. Maybe he couldn't sleep without it. Lie in bed, the notes seeping through the darkness, and try to ignore how the sudden silence at 3 a.m. felt heavier than the music itself. Then I noticed the basement light. My bedroom window faced the side of Hensley's house, where a small ground-level window glowed faintly most nights. It wasn't steady, it flickered, not like a faulty bulb, but in a rhythm that matched the music's tempo. Slow pulses during the quiet parts, frantic bursts when the strings hit a crescendo. I'd watch it sometimes, lying in bed, the curtains parted just enough to see. It was hypnotic almost, but it gave me this uneasy feeling like I was witnessing something I wasn't supposed to. I didn't think much of it until the night I saw him outside. It was late, maybe 2 a.m., and I was up getting a glass of water when I glanced out my kitchen window. Hensley was in his backyard, standing perfectly still in the moonlight, holding what looked like a small shovel. He wasn't digging, just staring down at the grass, his head tilted like he was listening to something. The music was still playing, faint but clear, and the basement light pulsed through the window behind him. I froze, my glass halfway to my lips, watching as he suddenly knelt, pressed his ear to the ground, stayed there for a full minute. Then he stood, brushed off his knees, and went back inside like nothing had happened. The next morning, I tried to brush it off. Maybe he was gardening, checking for pests or something. But the image stuck with me as ear to the dirt, the flickering light, the music. I started paying closer attention to Hensley's house. Curtains were always drawn, even during the day, and I never saw him leave, except to check his mailbox or take out the trash. No visitors, no deliveries, just him and that damn music every night. A week later, I got bold. It was a Sunday afternoon, and I figured I'd play the friendly neighbor card. I knocked on his door with a plate of cookies, a lame excuse. But it felt less intrusive than asking why he was listening to the ground at 2 a.m. He answered after a long pause, his face blank for a moment before that tight smile appeared. "Cookies," he said. "Not a question, just a statement." His voice was low, almost gravelly, and his eyes flicked to the plate, then back to me. "Yeah, thought I'd be neighborly," I said, forcing a grin. "I hear your music sometimes. Big classical fan?" His smile didn't waver, but his eyes narrowed slightly. "It helps me think," he said. "Keeps things calm." He took the cookies, thanked me, and closed the door before I could say anything else. I stood there for a second, feeling like I'd just been dismissed by a teacher. As I walked back to my place, I glanced at his basement window. The glass was covered with some kind of dark film, impossible to see through. That night, the music didn't stop at 3 a.m. It went on louder than usual, the strings sharp and urgent. I woke up around 4, the sound grating on my nerves. Noticed the basement light was still on, still flickering, but faster, almost frantic. I got out of bed, pulled on a hoodie, and stepped outside to see what was going on. The air was cold, the kind of damp chill that clings to your skin, and the cul-de-sac was dead silent, except for Hensley's music. I crept along the side of my house, staying low, and peered into his backyard. He was there again, kneeling in the grass, but this time he was digging. The shovel moved slowly, deliberately, like he was afraid of breaking something. The basement light pulsed behind him, casting long shadows that seemed to twist and stretch across the yard. I couldn't see what he was digging for, but the way he handled the shovel, careful, almost reverent, made my stomach churn. I backed away, my heart pounding, and slipped back into my house. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. The next day, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd seen something I was meant to. I started noticing little things about Hensley's house that I hadn't before. The grass in his backyard was patchy, like it had been dug up and replaced multiple times. His trash cans were always empty, even on pickup day, which was weird for a guy who lived alone. And once, when I was taking out my own trash, I caught a whiff of something sour and metallic coming from his side of the fence. It was faint, gone as soon as I noticed it, but it left me feeling sick. I started asking around casually to see if anyone else on the street knew anything about Hensley. Most of my neighbors didn't have much to say. He'd lived there for years, kept to himself, never caused trouble. But Mrs. Carter, an older woman who lived across the street, gave me a strange look when I mentioned him. "He's always been odd," she said, her voice low. "Used to have a wife, but she left maybe 10 years ago. No one's seen her since. Doesn't talk about her either." She hesitated, then added, "You hear that music at night?" It started after she left. I didn't know what to make of that, but it stuck with me. That night I couldn't sleep. Music was back, same as always, stopping at 3 a.m. on the dot. But around 3:30, I heard something else, a low, rhythmic thumping, like someone tapping on a pipe. It was coming from the wall that separated my house from Hensley's. I pressed my ear against it, my breath shallow, and listened. The thumping was steady, almost like a heartbeat, but too slow, too deliberate. I pulled away, my skin crawling, and noticed the basement light was on again, flickering in that same eerie rhythm. I don't know what possessed me, but I couldn't let it go. The next evening, I waited until the music started and crept into my backyard, staying low behind the fence that separated our properties. The basement window was maybe 10 feet away, its glow spilling onto the grass. I inched closer, my heart hammering so loud I was sure he'd hear it. The music was louder now, the strings swelling and dipping, and the light pulsed in perfect sync. I crouched by the window, peering through a tiny gap in the dark film. At first, I couldn't make sense of what I saw. The basement was dimly lit, cluttered with shelves and boxes, but in the center was a large wooden table. On it was something covered with a tarp, roughly the size and shape of a person. Hensley stood beside it, his back to me, swaying slightly to the music. He was holding something, a small, glinting object. Maybe a knife or a tool, and he was moving it in slow, deliberate circles over the tarp. The thumping sound came again, softer now, and I realized it was coming from the table. Something under the tarp was moving. I must have made a noise, a gasp, a shuffle, because Hensley froze. The music kept playing, but he turned his head slowly, like he could feel me watching. His eyes locked onto the window, and even through the film, I swear he saw me. His face was blank, but his eyes were wide, unblinking, like a predator spotting prey. I stumbled back, nearly tripping over my own feet, and ran back to my house. I locked the door, checked the windows, and sat in the dark, my pulse racing. The next morning, I called the police. I didn't know what else to do. I told them I'd seen something suspicious, that my neighbor was acting strange, digging in his yard at night, and that I'd heard odd noises. I didn't mention the table or the tarp. I didn't know how to explain it without sounding crazy. 2 officers showed up an hour later, and I watched from my window as they knocked on Hensley's door. He answered, calm as ever, and let them in. They were inside for maybe 10 minutes before they left, giving me a polite nod as they drove off. I called the station later that day, asking what they'd found. The officer I spoke to sounded bored. "Nothing out of the ordinary," he said. "Mr. Hensley's an eccentric guy, but his house is clean. No signs of anything illegal. It's probably just an old man with weird hobbies." I wanted to argue, to tell them about the tarp, the thumping, the light, but I didn't. I thanked him and hung up. That night, the music didn't play. The silence was worse, somehow like the air was holding its breath. I stayed up, watching Hensley's house through my curtains, but the basement light never came on. Around 2 a.m., I heard a car start. I peeked outside and saw Hensley's old sedan pulling out of his driveway, the taillights glowing red as it disappeared down the street. He didn't come back, not that night, not the next day, not the next week. His house sat empty, the curtains still drawn, the grass growing long. I asked Mrs. Carter if she knew where he'd gone, but she just shook her head. "Probably left for good," she said. It wouldn't be the first time someone in that house just vanished. A month later, the house went up for sale. I moved out shortly after, unable to sleep in a place where every creak made me think of that thumping sound. Before I left, I took one last look at Hensley's backyard. The grass was uneven, like it had been dug up and poorly patched. I didn't dare go closer. Still don't know what was under that tarp or why Hensley was digging in his yard at night. But sometimes when I'm lying in bed in my new place, I swear I hear faint classical music, just for a moment before the silence takes over again. And in that silence, I can almost feel something watching me, waiting, listening for my next move.